Welcome back to Restless. My name is Father Joseph Gill, and I can't get a word in edgewise over here. These guys won't stop talking so we can start our episode.
We don't talk.
We are Italian.
I know.
That's true. I'm
Surrounded.
not
You're
being
surrounded.
Italian.
Listen,
Where's
to,
Joe?
You did
We need
this to
Joe.
yourself,
We need Joe
okay?
here too, just so you're
Three
completely
Italians.
yeah, three
Oh,
against
man,
one.
I can't handle it.
Yeah.
Can't handle it.
3 Italians and a Frenchman.
Alas, what can I say? What can I say?
Yeah.
Anyway, you've joined Paul and Matt and myself as we restlessly seek the face of Christ in the midst of history. Because we were talking recently about history and our place in it. And I want to share with you a professor I had at Franciscan University by the name of Dr. Benjamin Weicker. Is he still teaching there?
I think he is. I haven't had him.
Okay, excellent teacher. I was there his first semester. So he was kind of wet behind the ears. But he made a claim that at the time I was like, this is ridiculously simplified. And later on I'm like, actually that can kind of make sense. And he was kind of positing the contrast of Christendom and paganism. And he was kind of saying, all right, obviously paganism was rife in the ancient world, and then once Christianity came about, 313 AD, which was the Edict of Milan making Christianity legal, the official religion of the Roman Empire, we saw a waning of paganism. It did still last for another 100 years or so, but then with the monasteries and everything, and the increase of Christianity really started to form Christendom. And you had this Christian mindset in Western Europe from 450 onwards, all the way through till he made the claim the Renaissance. With the Renaissance, it was the rediscovery, rebirth of the ancient pagan ideals, much of which was very humanistic, not necessarily in a bad way back then, but it took the goal of knowledge and science off of God and the pursuit of that eternal truth, and rather made it about the pursuit of physical things. Like I remember Francis Bacon, who has the awesomest last name in human history. He said,
Nice usage of the word awesomest.
Awesomest, the most awesome, yeah. And he said that the entire goal of science is the relief of man's estate. That was his famous quote, that it was really about trying to make our lives better, which would have been a huge contrast to those in the scholastic time, which would have said the entire point of science and knowledge is the contemplation of the divine. It's a very different purpose for why science and technology existed. So he made the claim that around the Renaissance, we saw the beginning of the decline of Christendom and the small rise of paganism. And you can see throughout the Renaissance, throughout the what comes after the Renaissance, like the Enlightenment era. Yep. You see more and more of that kind of, and you see with the deists. Ben Franklin and Thomas Jefferson especially, who was very much rejected the notion of a Christian God and the traditional Christian orthodoxy. And then finally, what we're seeing now, he said, was the flourishing, the fruitfulness of that. That's that seed that was planted 800 years ago in the Renaissance. And when I first heard that, I thought that's a ridiculous oversimplification. Just because people aren't going to church now, we can't trace it back that far. But I'm starting to think he was right. Reactions, thoughts?
Yeah, I have a couple. So I do think the Renaissance was a response. Everything usually history is kind of like laws of thermodynamics, right? There's kind of reaction. It's a reaction to other things. It's a push and a pull over time. It's not just like things don't just happen for the sake of them happening.
Yes, but that's very close to a Hegelian view of history. Hegel said that there's what is it? Thesis, antithesis, and then synthesis. So there's always this fight between
I think the
black, white, and
the synthesis part is where he goes wrong to some extent.
Okay.
Right, but you had
that's pendulum, yeah.
Yeah, so you have in the Middle Ages, which go from kind of late first millennium all the way through till the Renaissance, and you have the early, middle, and late Middle Ages. Very creative naming of these ages. But you do see in the
better than the Dark Ages, which I think is not a fair assessment. But
no, but Dark Ages kind of refers to what
like the early
what also during you had the plague, right? So that happened in like 1300s. Yeah. Like it's like very long. There's like several plagues, but the bubonic plague is the one we all know well, and so you have this idea that there is a real separation, and it was a divergence from the Christian message to some extent, where you had a divergence from the human and you have the separation in society of the human and all that comes with that and being man with humanity, right? Because you had, we as Catholics, we sometimes look and be like, oh, can't we just go back to the Middle Ages? It's like, well, maybe, but
are you saying there was like an over spiritualism?
No, opposite. Well, it was that there was a large like serfdom. And all the wars that contemplated around land and things like that a lot of that was on the back of people of the aristocracy and the nobility not treating humans like humans.
Very true.
Right. And so the Renaissance,
And there was no golden age ever in human history.
right.
No
That's
perfect
true.
time.
Yeah, no perfect time. And so the Renaissance, where we started to have, but because what came out of the medieval ages was all these scientific discoveries like the printing press and all these things that allowed knowledge to be transferred between people. And what that allowed is that anyone can now have access to this knowledge. It's not just in pictures like we'd see in cathedrals, which isn't a bad thing. It's a good thing. But also knowledge can now be transferred more widely across the population. Obviously, that took many, many hundreds of years.
Yeah.
And so now you have the Renaissance. Because all of a sudden now you're able to have the flourishing of the individual within society, right? And that allows wealth to be created. And thus you have the Renaissance. And now there's this focus on like humanism, which is like a very like kind of Greco-Roman, ancient Greco-Roman ideal that was very popular in paganism. And maybe you could say that they even got something right about that. I mean,
yeah, but if you study ancient Rome, there was a lot of human rights abuses.
Well, that's for sure,
feign
yeah.
to say that was a pinnacle of
no,
our
but you
respect
think
for one
about
another.
the ancient philosophers, they had a lot of this type of talk. And so you have a resurgence of that. And then you see it everywhere. You see it in the architecture, you see it in sculpture, you see it in, I mean, the church adopted a lot of that with Baroque architecture is very like
Baroque, and even before
neo-Roman.
that, you look at the Sistine Chapel, and Michelangelo focuses so much on the naked human body,
Yeah.
as did Da Vinci and things like that, and I think it's because the rediscovery of that. And
Yeah, and so you could say that this was a kind of the Renaissance, and then especially the Enlightenment, where it's like, okay, now that we have something here, so then the Enlightenment really focused on the individual. Like, what does the individual mean?
the rights of man,
The rights of man, and there's something good about that, right?
That's where we got our Declaration of Independence.
Right.
But then it took a darker turn in the French Revolution.
That's right. And so you can see that it's not just that we can say that the Renaissance, like there's a reason. I guess my point is in all this is that there's a reason why the Renaissance happened. There's a reason why the Enlightenment happened. And I'm not saying that it led to something better, but it is a phase of human development that we did undergo.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, absolutely.
And I would argue
Absolutely.
that all of this happened because we had Christian ideals. Like the Christian ideals is what fueled all of this. There's a reason why we didn't have a printing press until, over 1,000 years after Christ's death, right?
What was the reason?
Well, because we had a reason to need it,
Oh, yeah.
right? We needed to spread the gospel.
Sure.
Right?
Bible. I mean, the Bible was the first book printed, wasn't it?
First book printed. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the most widely distributed book, I think, still ever.
Yeah.
Right.
It's also the most shoplifted book. Did you know that?
I guess that's not. Yeah. I guess so.
Ironically, yeah.
That's kind of odd.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah. Well, in any case, that aside, so anyway, that's my story. There's a reason why we have however many thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of years that humans existed, and then all of a sudden we have this.
So would it be too simplistic then to say that it was a negative, just to start turning towards the Renaissance and Enlightenment, because it did take our eyes off God? It would be too simplistic to say that it was. I mean, it does sound like it had lots of positives, even towards Christianity.
I mean, it's hard to say with history, right? There's some positives and negatives to every. There's a positive to the Middle Ages, and there's negatives to the Middle Ages,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, the 313 was the Edict of Milan, and then the Roman Empire fell apart and was sacked by the Visigoths, and then all of Rome fell into paganism, even the Christian part of Rome, and then you had to have like a revitalization even after that,
Right.
which was
Right.
ended up becoming the Middle Ages, right?
Yeah, and it was interesting. I mean, because Augustine wrote his very famous book, City of God, in response to that, because the idea was that it's because we abandoned the pagan gods that they've cursed us with this fall. And he's making the point that no, the real true Christian God is not causing the fall of Rome.
Right.
Anyway, so that's my point. I think it is too simplistic to say that it's like, well, just because the Renaissance happened. I was like, no, the Renaissance happened for a very good reason.
Sure, that's fair. That's
Right.
fair.
Yeah.
I said I wasn't going to be able to confirm or deny any of your claims about the Renaissance before we started.
Yeah.
So
But connected to what you said, one of the things that perhaps many people believe is that history is a constant progression. Who was the one, I forget who it was, one of the German philosophers who was talking about the Übermensch, the Superman, like that history was continually.
was it Nietzsche?
It might have been Nietzsche. I'm not sure. Yeah, but it was history is continuing to purify humanity so that we're actually making progress. And even when I go back to read the documents of the Second Vatican Council, which is a very wonderful and legitimate council, a lot of it has a starry-eyed gaze at progress, as if progress is necessarily a good thing, necessarily leading in the right direction. do you think when we look over history, have we made progress? Have we made the world more human?
Not to be all Jordan Peterson, but what do you mean by the word progress?
Well, that's the question, right? I mean, certainly we've had technological progress, without a doubt.
Well, it depends on how you define progress.
That's fair.
How do you define progress?
That's fair.
How do I define? I mean, like you said, right? Technological progress, but ultimately, I mean, the most important kind of progress is the sanctification of individuals in the micro and of society in the macro.
Mm.
And one could even argue that, the glory of God is man fully alive, right? So have we made the world more human? Have humans?
What does it mean to be more human?
Yeah, these are hard things.
I mean, to be more human is to be more loving.
Yeah.
To essentially attempt to get closer to a utopia on earth.
Yeah. Okay, so I have a few comments. So I think a lot of Catholics, kind of like I said, they really don't like the Enlightenment because there's a lot of bad things that came out of the Enlightenment.
Yeah.
But it did get free will right. It got free
Yes.
will generally right.
Yeah, unless you're Calvin, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
There's always some exceptions.
The Reformation came out of the Enlightenment.
It did,
To
right?
some extent,
Exactly.
right?
Exactly.
I mean,
it did.
Yeah, so you could say they're
There's
kind of
an upending of authority in large part.
Yeah.
Right.
The Enlightenment mindset.
But also we had this focus that the individual matters, and so we know that like God loves each one of us individually and fully,
Yes.
right? And so that each human has this human dignity. It's what I said before, but maybe in a more concrete way. The Enlightenment got that right,
Yes.
right? And it's if you allow humans to be more human, then society will be better. Now, how you define better, I'm not sure, but
That's fair.
and so then
Right.
and then the ultimate kind of like the ending point of this is the United States. It's considered. I mean, maybe you can argue that in any which way you want, but that was because it's when like a bunch of men got
We've
together
codified
codified
the
this,
freedoms of each individual through the
which
Bill
was
of
like
Rights. And
roughly 100 years of Enlightenment philosophy was all used to come up with our Declaration of Independence and our Constitution.
yeah.
Right.
No, but it doesn't mean it was perfect. But
No,
I'm saying
I mean,
that like
still-
this was, and it's like, okay, well then you look at the United States, and it's like, well, that has a lot of problems, but there's a lot of good things about the United States too.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. Right, and so-
I mean, there was still a lot of progress to make in that the slavery was still an issue and.
Well, it's
Right.
it was a Protestant country. It's still a Protestant country. It's not a Catholic country.
I would argue it's no longer a Protestant
no,
country.
I mean, statistically, not maybe in,
Well,
maybe in the
statistically, it
mindset,
probably
but
is, yeah.
statistically not not Protestant anymore.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's not a Catholic country either.
No.
Yeah,
no,
that's
definitely
that's
not.
for sure.
Which
Yeah.
is to be frank, I've always believed that that's why America did so well. It's because the Protestant work ethic was way better than the Catholic work ethic. Always has been. And the Catholic countries like South America did not put in the work.
I don't know.
build.
Well, that aside.
That's a broad
Yeah.
broad brush anyway.
Yeah, that's a very broad brush. No, but I would say that so anyway, so there, we have work to do in the United States, right? Progress, I think, to Matt's point, is like, well, we want salvation, right? And that's what
Right.
we want.
Yeah.
And so like, well, let's do it because in the United. So let's take it from U.S. context. We're in the United States. A lot of our viewers and listeners are in the United States, and it's like, well, okay, well, we have
Actually, a lot of our viewers are from Africa. I'm just saying.
that's true.
So, I'm just throwing that out there.
Yeah. Tanzania.
Okay,
Here
but
we
a
go.
lot of our viewers and listeners are in the United States, as I said.
the majority.
And yeah, and so we have like freedom of religion, we have freedom of press for now, and all these things, and so we have freedom of speech. So like, okay, so we have this power to the individual. It's like, well, then it's our duty then as Catholics in this country to make it happen, because that would be progress, right? More people
Right.
being devout Catholics and believing in Jesus Christ,
Yeah.
and going and going and receiving the sacraments,
Yeah.
is progress. That's how I define progress.
I like that. I mean, that's very true, and that I think is one of the great challenges in that that's not something that can be technological or legal. It has to be something
Right.
that's from the heart, and that's
But we can use the tools though that we've developed through secular human progress to effectuate that.
yes.
Like I
Right,
drove
yeah.
here tonight. We're using technology, right? We had this big Eucharistic procession recently in the diocese as part of the National Eucharistic Procession. All that's enabled through technology,
Yeah.
and cars, and so it can go through the entire diocese in 3 days or whatever it was, right? Like,
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the
Right, so
internet.
we
I mean,
have-
this is coming to you through the internet and through the
Yeah.
amazingness of
so like
the
so
radio.
It's our duty. So the onus is now on us to use these tools appropriately.
Yeah.
Right.
And to use the technological progress, if we can
Right.
define it as such, to then spread the gospel.
Yeah.
That's our duty.
To
But I think-
use, yeah, you go.
I think that's an important point you make, though. That and maybe you didn't make this point, and I'm just imagining it. But that progress is not automatic. It's something that we have to evaluate in terms of how well it fits into that greater framework of, are we becoming a more loving society? Are we becoming more human? Are we becoming more Christ-like as a society? Because there is a view in many people that you got to be on the right side of history. In other words, like whatever progress is made is automatically good. We see that in the LGBT rights community, right? That you don't want to be on the wrong side of history because history is progressing, and we've progressed past what we were in the 1950s, where this was so closed off. And
and the downside of the Enlightenment is you end up with the LGBTQ community, right? You end up, or the movement, I shouldn't say, not the community itself, but the movement,
right?
It's being pushed by people.
It's so individualized.
Yeah.
Of course, that's part of that is the fracturing of the culture that has happened through the internet.
Yeah.
In that people can now find their own tribe
quickly and effectively,
easily,
actually.
and mobilize their tribe, which has been great for Catholics and great for LGBT, communities.
Yeah. And
those are the letters. I'm sorry.
Thanks. Yeah. Any case. So I think I would say that. So again, Enlightenment. You throw the Enlightenment out there, and then you throw then you have the Age of Reason, right? That comes after that, which I think is like the 1800s, which is basically like it's like this fight between. Basically, it's like a Puritan in the United States, at least. It's a fight between Puritanism and manifest destiny. And then all of a sudden, these Catholics from Ireland start showing up and messing everything up, so to speak, but not really. And you have this like great transition that happens in the 1800s from an agrarian economy in the United States, also in Europe to some extent, to an industrialized economy where you have a multicultural situation for the first time.
Yeah.
Right.
That changes a lot of things.
And it changes everything, and there's like good and bad that comes out of that. So,
but if we can rewind even further, I mean, I think the seeds of the Enlightenment come out of 313, because I think, in the sense that for the first 300 years of our Catholic faith, one had to choose to be Catholic because it was a great risk to your life, and so the people that were Catholic were serious about being Catholic. All of a sudden, within 10 years of the Edict of Milan, 90% of the Roman Empire converted to Catholicism, not because of any personal belief or personal conviction. Right. So now we have a lot of people who are Catholic in name only, and that persisted all throughout the next almost 10 centuries. In that we're living in a Christendom, but does that mean that everyone is a firm believer?
Right.
No, right? I mean, how many times through the 9th century, 10th century, 11th century, did saints have to preach against corrupt clergy who were totally corrupt? And all of that led to the Reformation. All of that led really to the Renaissance, because I think the fullness of the gospel was not being preached in the fact that dignity of the human person should have been a part of the Christian message from the beginning, and wasn't, because they allowed serfs and feudalism and all of this stuff, and they allowed it because it's an economic necessity. At the time, I don't think you could have really had Europe without the feudal system, but there was also that lack of there's a discontent simmering under the surface because there was a lack of respect for the dignity of the human person.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. I think so. I think that makes sense.
So I want to rewind it a little bit, and not historically in this conversation. That is.
Okay.
Yeah. And we were talking about, progress and its connection to freedom. And so it seems to me that historically, I guess, if we're going to be a little ironic here, you've got two ideas for freedom, and that's the freedom for excellence, right, or a freedom of indifference. And the freedom for excellence says that you have been given freedom in order to seek after that which essentially makes you excellent. And I mean that in the Christian way, which is you are excellent because you are being sanctified,
virtuous,
which is yielding to eternal
fully
life, right?
Human, yeah.
Exactly. Whereas freedom for indifference doesn't take that into account. And so if you have a freedom of indifference, it can basically mean that you're seeking after happiness, and the thing that you think makes you happy might actually not be the virtuous thing.
So really just license.
Right, exactly. And so I think that understanding the proper role of freedom, right, or I guess understanding the proper ordering of freedom is the key to the actual progression that needs to happen.
Sure.
I just wanted to fit that in there, in between the feudal system and the Enlightenment.
But I think you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right, because the human person needs freedom in order to flourish, but only
Right.
the right kind of freedom.
Right. Well, I
Right.
guess I would even say that there is only one kind of freedom. Right.
Authentic,
Like
yeah,
right.
yeah.
Yeah. Like if you are living within the framework of the freedom of indifference, you have miscalculated what freedom is.
Well, Catholic social teaching talks about the balance between rights and responsibilities, in that we have lots of freedoms as Americans: freedom of press, freedom of religion, freedom of speech, but that's balanced by the responsibilities that we now owe due to our freedom.
Right.
And that's the same way with any kind of real authentic freedom, is that it is freedom, but it has boundaries to it.
Right. Well, I think without those responsibilities, or without following through with those responsibilities, you actually end up in a different type of slavery or serfdom.
Absolutely.
Right. You end up being a slave to consumerism, or actually like addicted to substances in a very corporal sense, or you're
Which I think is where our progress is leading us.
right now it seems to be
Because-
that way.
Oh, for sure.
This desire for freedom for the human person has now led to a lack of any restraint, and now we see a generation of enslaved young people.
Yeah, and I think very grassroots right now, and you're seeing it hit the press more and more. But I think there is a groundswell against this. It might be really small right now, but like we don't know what God has in plan for this
Through what sort of means? Like Jordan Peterson, or like
Jordan
you know-
Peterson, or even we all talked about Harrison Butker when he talks at Benedictine College, or Regina Cheli or whatever in these big speeches in the class of 2024. But it's something, right? It makes
Yeah.
the media. You have all the crazy TikTok people going
Crazy.
crazy people,
heads exploding.
talking
of
about
that, a
him.
little bit of that.
And he seems, which is crazy because he's portraying a joyful image, a very much a message of joy, and all the people that are against him are all angry. So
Right.
angry. It's like, well, which path is better here?
Sure.
So
the
anyway.
March for Life, versus the March for Women that you see in D.C.
Yeah,
The March for Life is young, joyful, happy.
right.
Right.
As was angry.
The other one's very angry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think there's a groundswell, and I'm very. I mean, I've mentioned on the show I'm like a cynical optimist. So, but I am optimistic.
Well, I see in today's world more so than in the past. Now I'm 40, so I can say the past because I'm old.
Nice.
Right.
I see.
Well, you're no longer a young adult.
You're not-
Are
not.
you no longer zany?
I'll be zany till the day I die. That's my
Right. Well, there's
that's
probably some
my
truth
bio.
to that.
Yes. But I see more of a sharp dichotomy. There's very little middle ground, right? We see those who appreciate the structure that our Catholic faith gives us, and I think that is the draw of so many young people to the traditional Latin Mass, is that it is structure. It's a defined identity.
There's a
You know,
discipline to it.
There's a discipline to it, right? And that's a beautiful thing, and that's a needed thing, And so you see a lot of that draw, and then you see a lot of the draw, the complete polar opposite. You don't see a whole lot of middle, I think.
Well, I think the
Less
middle. The middle is what hurts us.
Like the lukewarm, right?
Yeah. Like that's what.
I will spit you out of my mouth.
Right. Revelation chapter 3
Right.
says Jesus. Yeah.
So I think for most of the second half of the 20th century, let's say, we had a lukewarm, I think was Bishop Barron called it, the beige Catholicism, right?
Yeah.
And
Sure.
like that's not what we are.
Right.
We stand when I mentioned earlier in this episode that like you have all these Catholics that come in and it was like presented an issue because they live differently. They act differently. They're apart, but they're part of. They're part of and yet apart at the same time. And there was a lot of discrimination because of that. And then the Italians come. It's like, oh boy, what are we going to do with them?
Right. And the issue was that Catholics so desperately wanted to fit in that they became beige.
They became beige.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the worst speeches, and I am no lover of JFK at all whatsoever.
Right.
And I know so many people fawn over him, and I don't understand why. But I think I didn't understand why, because the idea is that Catholics have finally made it.
Right.
We've got a Catholic in the White House. But his very famous speech to the Dallas ministers in 1960 talked about that beige Catholicism, right? Where he's like, I'm not going to let my faith impact my public life.
Yeah.
And that has set the tone for Catholic politicians since 1960.
Yeah.
Right.
And really for Catholics.
I'm privately
And I think,
pro-life, but
Yeah,
but couldn't force that on anyone else. Like,
right. Yeah, I mean that was George W. Bush's position as well, which was
Was it
shame.
really?
Yeah. So anyway, but I think what I was saying before, this groundswell is I think we do have, especially like us, right? I mean, we're doing this countercultural podcast, right? Where we talk about tough issues and try to be authentically Catholic. You have a resurgence of people going to adoration on a random weekday night. That's something that sets you apart. You're not at the bar. You're not watching Netflix. You're taking yourself out of society, within society. It's a very weird thing, but we do it well.
I think
we can do it well.
It seems weird, but that's how Christianity was lived in the beginning.
Yeah, for sure.
Right, in that it was, a small group of people. 10% of the Roman Empire was Catholic, and that's not much.
Yeah.
But it made a big difference.
Right. And so I think, as more and more Catholics, the kind of the faithful remnant is more authentically Catholic than beige Catholic, which ends up leading you nowhere.
Right.
Hopefully it leads you to salvation, but, at least from a societal way, it doesn't maybe lead you anywhere. Maybe this is the start. We probably won't be alive to see the fruit.
Yeah, it will be the start. I think I've talked to many people that are I think little Pollyanna-ish in that they think this is the start of what we're going to see, a giant renaissance in the church. But I think Pope Benedict was right in that the Church of the Future is going to be much, much smaller, but filled with very fervent Catholics.
Yeah, I'm more optimistic than him.
Really?
I am. Yeah,
You think
I
it's
think
gonna be a larger...
I think that when you have people that are enslaved, right? They want freedom.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no better freedom than in Jesus Christ. And there's no better place to find Jesus Christ than the Holy Catholic Church.
Yes.
So that's my thesis.
Just depends where you look.
What do you mean by that?
In that, in Stanford, for example, there are 13 parishes, many of which are very solid, and some of which, if you went there, you would get a lot of beigeness.
Less and less.
Less and less. But we're also very blessed in the Northeast, I think.
We're great in the Northeast. There's also places around the country. It's not just the Northeast. We have Kansas, Steubenville, Ohio, parts of Texas, Florida,
True.
Tennessee.
I'm just thinking in my home diocese, last year they celebrated an LGBT mass. And that's by young priests. It was young priests that celebrated.
Yeah.
It wasn't the
boomers.
Also,
as you get farther and farther down, the priests that are going to become priests are going to be very devout, probably very Orthodox Catholics.
I think there's no other reason to become a priest.
Right? Why would you?
Why would you?
You look at.
It's
our
not
current,
a step up the social ladder. That's for sure.
I know all but two of the seminarians in the Diocese of Bridgeport, and they're all they're incredible.
You know all but two. Wow, that's pretty good.
I think so. Well,
I think you know more.
Many.
You know more than me.
Well, I went on the World Youth Day trip, which we have 3 episodes on.
Yes, we did.
I spent a lot of time with the seminarians.
That's very true.
Right.
That's very true.
Case. But that's my hypothesis. I hope I'm right.
I hope you're right too.
Yeah. I think there's a lot to be optimistic about because I think what's the other option? Be pessimistic?
Well, that actually brings me to my last question is that, when you look at the trends of human history and you see, just history as a whole, it can feel very insignificant for one life. You're kind of like, how do I fit into human history? It's so big and I'm so small. And you see the cycles go around and around and around. And it can be very frustrating to say we're not making progress in holiness. Are we doing anything that's really going to shape the world? But you seem to have an optimism that overcomes that.
Yeah, why not? Why wouldn't I?
I don't know. I get kind of
depressed. In the words of G.K. Chesterton, we are not entitled to despair.
Ah.
So
that's a good one. Yeah, that's a good one.
You had some words you wanted to share here too.
I don't even know if they are. I'm going to read the quote since I've been playing with this piece of
stock
card. Stock paper for is it stock paper? It doesn't matter. Card stock. There you go. Thanks, Paul. I knew you would pull through. And I printed this because it is a quote from C.S. Lewis from The Weight of Glory. It's an awesome essay that is compiled with some other essays in that classic C.S. Lewis collection. And it really has to do with history and the individual, I think. And it goes like this. It is a serious thing to live in a society of possible gods and goddesses, to remember that the dullest, most uninteresting person you can talk to may one day be a creature which, if you saw it now, you would be strongly tempted to worship, or else a horror and a corruption such as you now meet, if at all, only in a nightmare. All day long we are, in some degree, helping each other to one or the other of these destinations. It is in the light of these overwhelming possibilities, it is with the awe and circumspection proper to them that we should conduct all of our dealings with one another, all friendships, all love, all loves, all play, all politics. There are no ordinary people. You have never talked to a mere mortal. Nations, cultures, arts, civilizations, these are mortal, and their life is to ours as the life of a gnat. But it is immortals whom we joke with, work with, marry, snub, and exploit. Immortal horrors or everlasting splendors.
That, I think, answers the question perfectly.
Yeah.
Because that's how you look at human history and realize that it's not futile.
Right.
That we are here because we have an immortal soul that's going to last forever. And you have an immortal soul, and Paul has an immortal soul, and our job is to get ourselves and the people we are around to heaven.
Yeah. No matter how many times we think about the Roman Empire per week.
Which I'm up to about 12 now. But
12. Yeah.
I'm just thinking of that great scene from Lord of the Rings, when Frodo is in the cave and he's saying, "Oh, Gandalf, I wish I didn't have the ring."
Right.
And Gandalf responds, "You don't get to choose what time you live in, essentially.
Right.
You're called by some mysterious providence to live in the time that you're called to now." And that's the truth about human history, right? We're put in the 21st century for a reason. Is it a hard century to live in? Yeah. But I think every century is a hard century to live in different ways.
Yeah.
And so we're put here with the specific gifts and talents to bring this century to Christ.
Right. And it's a gift. The difficulty is a gift because in our weakness, the Lord's grace is even greater.
Amen.
So.
Amen. Thank you for joining us in this episode of Restless. You can find us in Veritas Catholic Network, 1350 AM, 103.9 FM, on YouTube, podcast. Please like, subscribe, leave us a comment. Tell us what you think about human history. Tell us about other future episodes you'd like to have.
Yes,
on
please.
Restless. We
Definitely
need some
throw
good
some
suggestions.
questions on there.
Yeah, we need some good suggestions. Want to know what young adults are thinking, because I'm apparently not one anymore. Sadly. Oh. But anyway, tune in next time to Restless. Bottoms up.